Ladies and gentlemen, we now transition into Plenary 2, Balancing Innovation and Regulation, Crafting Ethical AI Policies for a Sustainable Future. As AI intelligence continues to evolve at breakneck speed, the region faces a critical challenge. How do we innovate boldly while safeguarding human rights, data privacy, and societal values? In this session, we bring together voices from policy technology and ethics to explore the frameworks needed to ensure that AI development remains inclusive, transparent, and accountable without stifling innovation. ASEAN has the opportunity to lead not just in technological adoption, but also in ethical governance. With that, let us explore this crucial conversation. Please join me in welcoming our panelist speakers and moderator to the stage. Now I have the pleasure of introducing once again Mr. Itzait Idros, Program Manager at Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, to moderate the session. The stage is yours, Mr. Itzait, once again.
Thank you so much, Rishi. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are on panel 2 now. So panel 1, I hope that was a success for everybody. I hope everybody learned something new about AI as well, and also in which direction the country is heading. So now that we're here on panel 2, so panel 1, it left us off on a very hopeful note, I think. One of the questions was how to integrate AI with society, and it brings out the human aspect of AI. And that in order to make AI more successful, we just have to be ourselves. Yep. Here today, this morning, just now doing the video presentation from MIM, I think it was a new presentation about the AI, and it was very graphic. It was very entertaining, and it reminded me. It was a bit like a movie. And one of the most recent movies I've watched was Mission Impossible. Has anybody seen the latest Mission Impossible yet? Any hands? Mission Impossible 8, and that one was also about AI. So it seems like every generation. So in the 80s, you had Terminator. In the 90s and early 2000s, you had The Matrix. And for this generation, we had Mission Impossible, where there's an overlord AI which threatens humanity. And we have to find ways to fight against it. I would like to quell those fears. And with me on stage today, we have Sitiliana Azman. She is the Data Privacy Lead at GX Bank. Yes. She specializes in protecting consumer data in the digital banking space and ensuring regulatory compliance in emerging fintech environments. And to my far right, we have Mr. Florian Frank. Florian is the director of Cyfluence Research Center, Germany. He conducts interdisciplinary research on cyber influence, disinformation, and the societal impacts of emerging technologies in AI. So hopefully your topic will not bring us down too much, and there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. Along with us here virtually as well, we also have Mr. Rohit Kumar, who is dialing in from, I believe, from Scandinavia somewhere. So Rohit is our CEO of Risk AI GmbH. So GmbH is the German version of Sindrian Berhad. He is based in Europe, and Kumar leads efforts in building ethical AI tools for the finance and risk sector, with emphasis on accountability and transparency. Yes, put your hands together. And just as a recap for the people who are not here this morning, so we have, as a Toastmaster, we actually have a system where we have yellow and red cards. And Today, since I don't have yellow and red, we'll have light blue and dark blue. So the light blue means that you're coming up towards the end of your time, and the dark blue is a hard stop. Okay, so kicking off today, let's start off with a short introduction from Liana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this event. So I met ITS, I think last year at another MIM event on AI. So at that time, I was in the capacity of a researcher. So I spent 2 years studying the AI regulatory landscape and the impact on how Malaysia is coping with the AI developments. Before that, after the 2-year period, now I'm having a new role this year with GX Bank in capacity of data privacy lead. I'm legally trained, so prior to my research stint, the short 2-year stint, I was working as in-house counsel for 10 years. So I have a legal brain, now privacy and now AI.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. As mentioned, my name is Florian. I'm the director of the Stifling Research Center. We are based in Berlin, and we study influence operations, digital hostile influence, et cetera, the impacts, how it's done, methodologies. I will actually talk a little bit about the use of AI in offensive influence operations after this. AI for us is a huge game changer, both in the defense and the offense. When we look at the use of AI in the offense, it is frightening to say the least, so I have to apologize. I'm not coming with very good news today, actually. But on the bright side, at the same time, as much as it's used on the offense, we do see more and more that, especially when it comes to the correlation of large data, we look at social media, et cetera, we use a lot of AI tools to actually analyze and find and identify these influence operations.
Thank you so much, Flo. And over to Rohit.
Great. Thank you for having these very crucial conversations. Very happy to be. So I have been in the AI industry for over 10 years now. I'm a bit of a dinosaur in the way that AI evolves these days.
I've helped over 12 banks and financial institutions establish their AI governance programs. So basically, how do they develop systems, AI systems, which are ethical, sustainable, and that includes a wide range of aspects, including security, risk management, etc. So happy to be part of the conversation, and let's take it.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Okay, so for panel 2, the topic is balancing innovation and regulation, crafting ethical AI policies for a sustainable future. We'll dive straight into it. So basically, do current data and technology laws in Southeast Asia adequately cover AI? If not, where are the biggest gaps? I'll pass this over to Liana first.
Okay, sure. So just for context, before we came to here, Is gave me a series of questions, and he chose to pick the most difficult question to open the conversation. So is Malaysia or ASEAN? Both sufficient.
Yeah.
So I think the test of readiness I think sufficient might be the incorrect term here, because sufficient would mean that you've reached the end of the finish line and you're complete. But when it comes to AI, because of its rapid progression, you will never reach that complete, I've done it stage. Anything when it comes to regulating or trying to control or placing guardrails is a continuous effort. It's throughout the it has a life cycle. So there will never be a stage where, okay, we've done everything that we can possibly do and we're safe. So that's the reality of things. So the test to know whether what we have now, it's more of are we prepared is the more appropriate question. So the test of readiness to see is that has there been growth within Malaysia and ASEAN? So if we trace the timeline, can anyone guess when Malaysia first took seriously AI and started wanting to regulate it? Anyone from the crowd? I won't ask my panelists because I think they know the answer. So it was around the 2020s, in 2021. 2021 was kind of the big boom where everyone started being interested in building the digital economy. Everyone wanted to utilize AI to boost economic growth. And that was spurred by COVID as well in 2020, because you then realize that digital connectivity is kind of the one thing that everyone needs to progress in the economy. So from a regulation perspective, you will see that it started with 2021's National AI Roadmap in Malaysia. And this was a full-scale roadmap on how can we capitalize on AI. And the principle of governance was under this banner of 7 responsible AI principles. So that was the Malaysian approach in 2021. There was much more progress in the next 3 years, in the last 3 years, where just last year we had a more upgraded version of the National AI Ethical Guidelines in 2024. And we now have, you heard from Sam Majid from National AI Office, who's spearheading. So the approach that Malaysia take is not let's pass one law like the AI Act and govern everything at one shot. But instead, we took what the YB Minister Gobin said during his opening speech in the National AI Office, an infrastructural approach. So governing, what they did was that they concentrated in building AI adjacent laws. AI adjacent laws means that these legislations don't specifically mention artificial intelligence in the text, but they're highly related. So you have laws such as cybersecurity, and you have laws such as the amendments to the Personal Data Protection Law. These 2 elements, which are adjacent to AI, cybersecurity and privacy, help support the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure which the country needs to build. So here we see there's a lot of movement, and now with it, as you heard from the first panel, they're opening up new working groups, developing new standards. So this progressive movement is a sign that we're prepared. Because I would be worried if things were a wait and see and nothing is moving stagnant.
Okay, so that means we are actually getting to the point where we're sufficient in, or prepared.
I hate that word, but yes, we're very sensitive to what is going on and what needs to be done. That's yes.
Okay. Now, this is quite unique because Rohit, your company is based in Germany, and Florian, your company is also based in Germany. That means with Rohit, you've had a lot of experience with Europe and Asia as well. So what are the key differences that you see right now between Europe and Malaysia or ASEAN, how we handle things down here as compared to the EU?
Sure. I think we were supposed to present a couple of slides. So we can do that.
I think it will help the context.
Oh, yes, please.
That's perfect. There we go. I hope you guys can see my screen. And this will provide the context that you are seeking as well, Idris. So let's look at some basics first, which will help this conversation a little bit. A lot of people, mistake ethics and trust and what's the relation, how the regulation related to that. So 2-minute primer will help. I think when the speakers brought out very correctly that 2021 was when people started to take AI regulation seriously. This was really, UNESCO had come up with an ethics guidelines. That was one of the first ones in the world. Europe had been working on it, but this was one of the first comprehensive one. And what it said was basically ethics consisted of 4 basic concepts, which I've kind of put up here: respect for law, inclusivity, peaceful of promotion, just and interconnected societies, and certain fundamental rights. Building on these would be certain principles, such as having safety, having sustainability, responsibility, non-discrimination, etc. And the operationalization of this is what we call trustworthy AI. Okay, that was the UNESCO version. The Europe had also a very similar approach, and the high-level expert, again in 2021, but they had been working since 2018, brought out a similar framework whereby they said, what is trust? A trusted AI system is a lawful, ethical, and robust system, right? AI. Ethics is one component of that. which is grounded in fundamental rights of humans, such as autonomy, harm prevention, etc. The operationalization or realization of this trust essentially comes through these 7 requirements, and which then they also brought out a framework for assessment of it through a assessment structure over here. So if you think about the relation between the trust and ethics, this is kind of lays down. From trust to regulation now depends on how you frame it, right? So from an EU perspective, there are 3 objectives: to promote the uptake of AI, address risks, and avoid market fragmentation. This begins to answer your question. EU is a large market. One of their core purposes was to avoid market fragmentation, which is probably not where Malaysia is that concerned about. And that provides a legal framework for AI in terms of what they did things. Malaysia's approach would be different compared to EU in this regard. So I'll kind of stop there. I think that gives some kind of an understanding in terms of why Europe took an approach of regulating AI the way it did, which is pass a comprehensive bill, whereas Malaysia has opted to be a bit more, let's say, prudent or a bit more wait-and-see policy. At the same time, I think when you're talking about the ASEAN aspect, this market fragmentation becomes important. So important is aligning with your partner countries and how to have a similar or common regulation. So I'll kind of stop there.
What do you notice?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to take it a step backwards to kind of go to the foundation of the development of the kind of the frontier models that we're seeing, ChatGPT, et cetera, most of them coming out of the US. Currently, globally, we are in a race. Who can create the most powerful models, and kind of the background to that is whoever has these models will be able to assert a certain amount of power, because these models will be used pretty much across everything that we are witnessing. And when we look how these models are actually created, there's 3 factors that play a role. That's computing power, that is the algorithms, and the data. And when we look at the EU, let's start with computing power. Pretty much the US has the cornerstone on this, with the access to really the most sophisticated chips. When we look at algorithms, we look at the US, we look at the EU and China, it's pretty much on par. But when it comes to access to data, the EU has a very strict policy. And the thing is, I genuinely believe that this comes out of a very, generally, like, when I look at GDPR, the background to it is the data protection of the individual, which is actually a goal which I find to be something worth striving for. Practically, though, this means that when it comes to the development of these systems, the access to the data to train these models for all the European models is very limited. And we see this now that when we compare the US, we compare Europe, and we compare China, Europe is really falling behind, far behind, and I would argue with every year falling further behind. Now, on top of that, the EU has created this AI Act in 2024, which actually I think is a model where it takes different risk levels of AI and creates a regulatory framework around it to try to find ways to prevent misuse of AI. Which again, I find something that is really worth striving for. But then I look at it from a geopolitical context that the whole world is fracturing. We're in this race, and then we look at the big players, again, US and China, which don't adhere to it. And the real danger, and this goes to the topic of what we're talking about today, that the EU is facing is while the background to the regulations that the EU is putting forward are important, and these are important discussions that need to be had, the reality is that the EU is taking itself out. And if this goes forward like this, the EU will be the one that will try to regulate everything, but will not be in a position of actually owning any of the large AI models.
Okay, thank you so much, Flo. It's it's interesting because I think the Malaysian view of Europe is that we always view the EU and Western nations as the forefront. You know, we always think that they're highly advanced in technologies, and in the case of Germany, this was always the case when it came down to mechatronics or mechanical engineering or automobile engineering. But now when it comes to digitalization, it feels like countries like Germany tend to be a bit slower compared to what's going on down here in Southeast Asia.
A bit is a good way of saying thank you.
From your viewpoint, Rohit, do you see something similar that the EU is falling behind in this race?
I have a slightly different opinion to Florian over here. It's okay to have different opinions.
I've worked a lot in the US. US doesn't have a federal regulation on AI, but now what the problem is, every single state is coming out with its own regulation. California has passed one. Colorado has passed one. Texas Parliament has passed one. We'll probably voted in soon. So in essence, what you have is a huge fragmentation. So from an organizational perspective, not particularly a societal one, you're very unsure now, how do I handle this? How do I handle 50 different regulations coming from 50 different states, etc. Right? I don't necessarily agree that the regulation is going to set things back. The way that was alluded to earlier, in terms of digital and technological innovation, there's no doubt that Europe is behind, and especially Germany is behind ASEAN. One of the reasons there is not necessarily regulation. It's more the fact that the unique time, that we live in today has allowed ASEAN, with the emergence of 4G technologies, etc., to really leapfrog. Most developing countries have leapfrogged developed countries in terms of digital infrastructure, right? You didn't need to establish terrestrial infrastructure to the same extent, and most developing countries were able to invest properly in 4G technologies, 5G technologies. So the problem in Europe is that the investment in infrastructure was fairly high about in 70s and 80s, which meant that there's a lot of legacy technologies that needs to be upgraded, etc. It's not been done to the best way that it should, because again, the thinking is slightly old in that respect. But we see good signs right now. Like there have been technological advances, new AI companies coming up in Europe, and I'm relatively hopeful about the role of Europe, even compared to US. I'll kind of stop there.
Thank you, Rohit. Okay, Florian, you'd like to
add one more point to that, because I thought it was very interesting, bringing ASEAN back into it. One thing, we work a lot as an organization in ASEAN and connect to a lot of universities, etc. And I spend about half the year in ASEAN. And one thing I do have to say is when it comes to the adoption of new technologies and the willingness to actually take that risk, see how it's going, is much higher in ASEAN. So I will agree on that one, that I do think that in this regard, ASEAN definitely has a lot of potential. Europe is a little bit more conservative, and also just we have much older populations.
All right, coming back to ASEAN now. And Liana, when we first met, you were a researcher, and now you're with GX Bank. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at GX Bank? And so for example, my personal experience is when I was studying in Germany, this was maybe about it's probably about 20 years ago now. They already had e-banking. They already had non-physical banks. And GX Bank is a non-physical bank, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us a little bit more about what you do at GX Bank, and as a data privacy expert in the banking field, what are the biggest risks you see with AI integration?
So a little bit of what I do, a part of my job scope. So I'm part of the data team from GX Bank, and I'm in the field of data privacy. So how does that relate to AI, right? So again, it's really intertwined. So a big scope of my job is we have our own, machine learning teams. We have data scientists. I deal with them almost every day. So where I come in is that how do I make sure that I put in accountability checkpoints from every single stage in the AI lifecycle, right? So because AI, when it comes to developing AI, it's a broad cycle, right? There's a pre-stage where you're just proof of concept, you're just talking about it, then you push it into production, and then there's a post-mortem where you have to see how it's relating, right? So putting in those accountability checkpoints is part of my scope, and a big part of it is like before you can even put a checkpoint or to tell people how to establish rules, you have to know the landscape, right? You have to know who's using AI, for what purposes, to what extent, what are their understandings. So when you ask what is the key risks when it comes to AI integration, that's your question, right? So what are the key risks? A lot of people misunderstand that when it comes to regulating AI, we're trying to regulate the AI system, like we're trying to regulate the machine. It's not. We're actually trying to regulate people. It's a people risk. Why? Because it's the humans who are creating this AI. It's the humans that are using it. It's the humans that are deploying it. So what we're trying to regulate are humans, not the AI system itself. So what that means is that there's a lot of big pictures, puzzle pieces around where you have to gather people, and everyone reacts to AI differently, right? They have different understandings of how to use AI. So it's a big people risk. That's the biggest risk, because what you don't want, what tips the scale into the scary side of what Florian has shed us some light on, right, is when people are unaware how to act or use AI responsibly, where they don't take into consideration when risks are flagged out. For example, privacy considerations. How can customer information, how do you make sure that it's secure without the expense of innovation? So that's my point of view.
Okay, thank you, Liana. No, I was just thinking about it, putting in the checks to make sure that it's checks on the human aspect then. So Rohit works in a similar field, I believe, when it comes to financial systems. Risk AI focus on responsible AI in financial ecosystems. What does responsible AI look like in practice?
Okay. So how do you work about 12 acts? Maybe I can share more of an industry perspective on this. 100% right that the core focus of governance mechanisms, not just regulations. The regulations at the national level. When you talk about organizational levels, what you're talking about is having proper governance, and the governance, to 90% of the case, is aimed at how do we develop AI in a way that needs it to be trustworthy.
So there are a lot of risks, but let's focus on maybe 3 or 4 primary risks that I see in the financial sector. One is intellectual property, because AI is a relatively new area, especially generative AI, and there are a lot of IP risks associated with it and legal risks. Where is the accountability of the AI decisions? Who is accountable for it? To what extent is it? So these are, from our industry perspective, that's one of the top risks that we are talking about. Number 2, there are completely new adversarial risks that we were, never exposed to. So, for example, one of my clients, they had a situation whereby, prior they had a test system, which was a chatbot kind of system. Unfortunately, they had not put a proper governance mechanism in place, and that's why they brought us in. And the result of that, before they brought us in, was that they actually had a adversarial attack whereby the chatbot was made to say certain politically sensitive and racially sensitive things. Right? You have all talked, seen about jailbreaking, and this happened in practice. And then the attacker was trying to use this for, ransoming the company, etc. So this is the kind of new risks that we were completely unaware of before generative AI. So this two is adversarial risks. The third one, which a lot of people overlook, is concentration risks. What I mean by that is that nowadays you have in the olden days, you'd have one AI system for one application. Now what you have is, because the huge amount of investment required in generative models, you typically end up utilizing one or two models to drive hundreds of applications on top. Right? So in the olden time, it was one model, one application. Now it's one model feeding 100 applications on top. So now if this system goes down, it's compromised, the terms of use change, what are the implications for the organization? Not just for the one application, but now for the entire infrastructure, the AI infrastructure of that organization. So when I deal with industry, these are three primary points or risk factors that we are addressing right now.
Okay, thank you, Rohit. Coming back to Florian and our doomsday scenarios that we're facing, it's also a big question on ethics right now, because basically whenever it comes to LLMs, it's the user that will then feed in the data to the AI, and the AI will learn off of that data. So from your perspective, what you've seen in the world, what's happening right now with, I think the term that you use is hostile influence. So what direction is the world heading right now, and how can we actually curb something like Terminator from happening?
Well, wow. I wouldn't go so far as Terminator. I think, so in a nutshell, what we do is we study influence operations, hostile influence campaigns. So in general, when we talk about these kind of campaigns, we have a lot of fake users, we have fake websites, not only, that are spread and targeting a certain, let's say, target group. So when it comes to the use of AI in these kind of operations, it really begins, it's actually very mundane. To run such an operation, you go back 5 or 10 years, something simple like running a fake news web page. You actually had to hire journalists. You need to have a web designer. You need to have possibly a photographer, an editor, etc. Now, with the onset of AI, I can actually, as an individual, and we ran an experiment 2 years ago, I'll mention that later, but I would argue as a single individual, I'm able to run, let's say, 20 daily updated news web pages, probably partially even fully automated with interesting content across different areas without even being an expert. Now, this is further to that when we're talking about content creation, memes, pictures, etc. And these are still the simple things we're talking about. Again, I used to have a designer for this. Now it's just a question of a prompt and adding some text to it. And then we enter the area of deepfakes, which is, I think we're all familiar with that right now. I think every politician everywhere currently is facing this right now when it comes to videos, when it comes to audio deepfakes, and they're becoming increasingly difficult to actually identify. And this is, for us, for example, when we look at where AI is going and in this field, it's actually very, very frightening because it's making it incredibly easy. I kind of call it the democratization of crime. And this means that what used to be very sophisticated operations are becoming increasingly easy for anyone to do. And I could talk about another 20, 30 minutes about this, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think you've got a session after this, an address that you're going to give as well. So we can leave it for that session. Liana, coming back to your previous work, though, with AI and all of the understanding that you've done and the research that you've done back then. So for ASEAN, what role can ASEAN play on the global stage in shaping ethical AI governance? And can we be a bridge builder between the global north and the global south?
Do you want the honest answer or the diplomatic answer?
I mean, we've had a day of honesty, haven't we? Especially with Kun just now on stage. Let's be honest today.
So, you know, there's always this talk about these divisions, these superficial divisions of the global north, the global south, the mid countries, and, you know, so, to some extent it's true. But to be honest, if ASEAN really wanted to make an impact to turn heads, then what must first be done is that they need to be able to capture that market share, that AI digital market share, to show that we're somehow a powerhouse. Only then the media or whatever fraction will start paying attention to us. That's the honest answer. But when you look at how far we progress in terms of ethics, we're severely underestimated. So I don't agree with when you say that we look up to the EU and then thinking they're high and dandy, but because in 2024, ASEAN released its AI governance ethics and guidelines. And this isn't the first, like, it's not like a first mover advantage, because there are, I mean, I think both Rohit and Florian know, there are hundreds of frameworks. Hundreds, and they resonate the same, like it's almost like a broken record. And as a researcher, you kind of start to get bored. Like you're hearing the same thing over and over again. The same terms are being thrown at you: transparency, privacy. And there are actually, surprisingly, you would think everyone's on board with ethical AI. There are actually some anti-ethics. And I used to be one of them. Like I used to be, not that I didn't believe in ethical AI, no offense, right? But I had that element of skepticism, because a lot of the times these policy documents are very abstract. Like they come from a very abstract policy kind of framework, which doesn't work and doesn't translate to the industry. Because when you deal with, for example, computer scientists, engineers, even managers or strategic thinkers, they don't think in abstract principles. And even for legal people, legal egos, they think in more procedural thought. So when you give them a document, like I can walk into my boss's room and put on the table, okay, here's a framework, let's just implement it. There's 7 principles. They would just, okay, what do we do? What's the boundaries? And what A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? But the advantage of that, when I was looking at the ASEAN's governance, it's not just 7 principles and you can do whatever you want. They actually go into the details about what sort of technical controls, organizational controls, risk management strategies that you actually have to implement at an organizational side to reach responsible. So I feel like there's a lot of work that ASEAN is putting in, and individual countries are coming up with amazing frameworks. It's just we don't get heard much because a lot of the spotlight shifts to, you know, what's happening in the EU, the ups and downs, or what Trump is doing in his home. You know, there's a lot of distractions that don't give ASEAN enough credit.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fair answer, actually, because, like I said just now, you know, we tend to look up towards the EU, towards the US, towards the West before this. I think I mean, show of hands, how many people here have either studied in the UK or have kids studying in the UK? It's this very Malaysian point of view, I think, where we tend to look towards the West as leaders. But this might not necessarily be the case. My next question was actually directed towards Rohit. And my question for him was going to be, what can Southeast Asia regulators learn from the EU's AI Act? But this seems to contradict what you've said before, that we don't necessarily need to learn from them. What's your view on this, Rohit?
You can learn from mistakes.
This is a very new area where everybody's trying to figure out their bearings. So if you look, one thing I have to give on the European approach, they have been very systematic. I think I showed you the framework in which they considered, and then there's a legal framework below that which addresses, you know, certain legal risks, but also remediation. Right, in terms of, okay, if the AI does harm, what do we do? There's no regulation on it right now. Right? There was planned to be, they scrapped it because they want to think about it, but they're thinking about it. So there are 2 aspects that we can learn. One is we can see what is the thought process behind EU's decisions, and what are the mistakes that they have made in that, and how can we kind of learn from that. So that's always a huge advantage. The second one is that there has been a much more like a systematic approach to regulation and building that in the European context. I'll somewhat disagree with the speaker there in the sense that I think regulations should be somewhat abstract. And then it then comes down to the industry bodies to interpret that for their current context, right? That's also the approach, for example, that has traditionally been taken in the US, not in the AI context. I think the Trump administration is a bit averse regulating at a federal level. So, you know, the concept of having a framework at an abstract level and then having industries interpret that to something actionable, and then organizations to develop then governance mechanisms to operationalize that. I think that's a very nice multi-tiered structure. And in order to make AI resilient, you need this multi-tiering, right? Kind of like defense in depth kind of thing, whereby you're solving problems in different solution or problem spaces.
Thank you, Rohit. Florian, your view on his answer just now, and listening to Liana and also Rohit, and your experience around the world. How do you view AI ethical regulation?
I have to say, first of all, I agree with Rohit on this one, where the US has a very interesting approach in actually giving a lot of leeway to the industries to decide how regulations are actually implemented. And the EU has traditionally really a very heavy-handed approach in many different areas. And where I have real issues with this, again, talking about the AI Act, I think fundamentally it's actually right. It addresses some of the major issues that we are facing. And when I look at the direction that AI is going, I think this is actually a very interesting guideline or set of regulations. But then I think about the practical implementation of it. And there I see the real issues because the EU is regulating something, draining out a lot of innovation, draining out a lot of investment, which is going to the US. And because of that, actually losing a cutting edge in this area. Now, I have to admit, I don't have the answer to it. I don't really know what is the right way, because when I look at the US, for example, where, I mean, you were mentioning now a lot of the regulations are going down to a state level, but if we look at it at a national level and the current administration, I mean, arguably a lot of regulations are going out of the window. And even if there are regulations, you look at this administration, doesn't even follow them itself. So you see now in the AI field, the US is taking a direction where pretty much the growth of these AI models and the AI sector is precedent to maybe some of the security issues. And while the EU is trying to address them, it is putting itself out of the game. So there's a huge conundrum there. And I have to honestly say, I don't have an answer.
And I think it's okay not to have an answer. I think right now it's still it's still such an emerging technology. It's still such an advancing technology that maybe nobody really knows the right way forward. Now, coming back to Liana and your work with GX Bank. So, are fintech and digital banks prepared to manage data responsibly as they adopt more AI-driven services? And what type of AI-driven services are already in place?
Right. So that's a broad question. So I can't speak for all banks, or I can't even speak for the entire fintech industry. So we're just a drop in the ocean in comparison to what's going on. But my personal opinion is that given the context, like when you look at industry level, different industries have different level of preparedness and different use cases for AI. I personally feel that the financial industry has an advantage when it comes to using AI responsible. And there's a context to it, and perhaps it's a very Malaysian-specific context, but it's the reason I have proof, and the evidence is that the financial industry is already a heavily regulated sector, right? And we're subjected to the Bank Negara regulations. So if I take, for example, just one ethical framework, for the ASEAN, for example, ASEAN continuously references in their documents that you need to have organizational controls, technical controls, and risk management. These terminologies, organizational controls, technical controls, risk management, is an area which financial industry is very familiar with, and things that we are already implementing because Bank Negara requires us to do though. And we're fortunate that the attitude of the financial regulator is pretty AI driven. Like now Bank Negara is encouraging the use of AI for fraud monitoring purposes, because you can no longer wait for humans to manually monitor things. You have to leverage on technology. And also you have to fight fire with fire, AI with AI to almost a certain extent, because as Florian mentioned, it's easy to trick people or create frauds because of the capabilities of AI. So also the nature of banks is that the organization itself forces you to have a diverse set of people with special skill sets. So you have your data analysis. You must have a risk management team inside. So that's a risk. Not all organizations have it. If you go to a marketing agency, they wouldn't have a risk team. They wouldn't have a machine learning team, but banks have those. So in that sense, we have the right skill sets, and we have already existing regulations and practices which we just have to build from. So when AI comes into the picture, we were already experimenting automation kind of fields. It's just opening up that wing. Okay, what are the use cases? So common use cases that you will see is chatbots, like what Farlina mentions. Even airlines use chatbots too. That's kind of the low-level use, low-risk use of AI, because they're trained on a specific data set on how to answer queries, but it's not as advanced. And then there are also more advanced usages in terms of onboarding a customer. So like know your customer procedures. The traditional know your customer procedures back in the day before I even existed was you had a person who knew everyone in the industry and would have to physically call them and contact them to validate their authenticity. But now with technology, how fast does it take to open a bank with a digital bank? You just have to, capture face, upload your document, and then there's technology to analyze that documentation.
So this is the eKYC that a lot of banks are using.
Yes, the eKYC, which also Bank Negara also has regulations on there. So Bank Negara also has risk management frameworks, which the cybersecurity and technology team have to factor in consideration every time you have a new AI project. The area which is still being explored is agentic AI, and that's kind of the full experience. Maybe you've seen some of the TED Talks where an AI agent can help book an appointment for you. So you no longer have to deal with the interface of just a dumb chatbot, but this AI agent can do everything from pulling up your information. You no longer have to do A, B, and C. That's kind of the direction which you want to head with, because we want to give the full customer experience.
Yeah, I get that. But whenever I see videos of you talking to your phone, telling them, okay, book me a dentist appointment, it kind of freaks me out a bit, because it's accessing so much information. So how do we actually ensure that information doesn't disappear onto the dark web or somewhere else? I mean, as a user, as a normal human being, these are things which I'm kind of afraid of. Florian, what do you think about that?
Well, that's a loaded question. Do we have another 2 hours? So I think there's different components that come into that. I mean, we do have, for example, coming back to the EU strong with the GDPR, we have strong regulatory base which decides what data can be used where, how long it's stored, et cetera, et cetera. And taking it a few steps forward, actually also going into the governmental side when we look at security agencies, all this kind of field. On top of that, this is where we go into the cybersecurity field. We have standards for different companies, banks, etc., that they need to fulfill in order to protect the data. I think in that regard, actually, at least on the European side, we're quite well set up. Then again, I mean, I don't want to open an entirely new topic. We're looking at AI and the use of AI in cybercrime, in the creation of malware, in the finding vulnerabilities, etc., going through large data sets and how to actually find information that you can abuse against specific people. This is, of course, a can of worms that is opening where we'll have to see where it goes.
Okay, thank you so much. We are going to open the floor for questions now. We also have the Slido QR. So if there are any questions, please feel free to go up to the mic and we'll answer those questions, hopefully. Yes, I think it's Dr. Sharifa.
Thank you very much to distinguished panelists for sharing with us your insights on AI. A lot of focus is on financing sector as well as fintech. I would like also to maybe request for some focus on two other important sectors. One is the energy, because as we see, ASEAN, for the ASEAN Power Grid, is now a great collaborative platform for ASEAN in order to have renewable energy distribution among our countries. But as we see during the 28th April blackout in Spain, the RE was 70%. So that caused great instability. And they also identified that AI could be used in order to predict the variable energy demand and production in order to stabilize this grid. So I hope for the energy sector, this will be considered. Secondly, you also mentioned about security. Right now, we see drones are being used in countries. Initially, it's supposed to be for the good, but currently it's to attack some of the nuclear power plants and other facilities. So I'd like to just highlight the Nobel laureate for Physics 2024, Jeffrey Hinton. He had not only highlighted the pros and benefits of AI, but he had also raised the concern about AI's potential for bad consequences. So would you agree or support that for ASEAN, we should have an ASEAN collaborative effort to do both the foresight as well as scenario planning in order to identify various possible terrible scenarios for the government and private sector and the security to develop strategies and game plan in order to be able to counter this before it impacts ASEAN and the region? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to direct that second part of your question just now towards Rohit, and also to Liana after this. With regards to your first part and energy, I think we are also planning on having a future crucial conversation on this topic about nuclear power, about renewable energies, and also, especially here in Southeast Asia, where we're opening up so many new data centers. How will that consume power? How much power will it consume? How will that impact the environment as well? Because data centers are not just computers, you know, it's not like flipping on a switch and that's it. They take in so much power and they take in so much water as well to cool down everything. So these are topics which hopefully we'll have for our next crucial conversation. Now coming back to the question on ASEAN and regulatory, Rohit.
So I actually think that maybe Florian would also be a very good person here because he has studied that exact areas. But I'll give you a generic answer and then kind of defer there. The principles of risk management in AI are about 70% the same across industries. One of the best standards right now is that released by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US. It applies cross-industry. Right? If you follow most of the recommendations there in a proper way and not take it as a checklist, right, you will typically be able to cater to about 90% of the emerging risks. 10%, the leading edge things are always new. There always needs to be somebody thinking. There always needs to be somebody monitoring, scenario planning, etc. Right. So that's one. Number two, having a regional approach in the ASEAN context. Yes, I had also mentioned that. When Europe was coming up with regulations, one of the motivations was to avoid market fragmentation. In Malaysia's context, is different. But because we see ASEAN as approaching a single market, you need to harmonize the policies at multiple levels, including in cyber resilience in AI aspect. So yes, scenario planning, etc., is required, but an organization or multi-leveled approach steeped in risk culture is important over here, right? At the organizational level, at the industry level, and at the organizational level. And there are frameworks today which are available to address that.
So I'm going to keep coming back to the same theme. It's on the one hand what I wish, and that would be that we all come together, ASEAN, EU, and the big players, US and China, and come to some kind of ethical frameworks where we decide on the use of AI, in this case, in military use. And we decide that this is not what we want to do. But then I look at the reality of it. A nice example is Germany. Germany, up until 2022, decided it will not use any drones in its army because it kind of brings these images of, we were talking about Terminator and these kind of machines going out killing people. Come the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that went overboard immediately. So that's off the table now. Germany is buying drones. Now, when it comes to the use of AI in drones, and here, in pretty much in all military systems nowadays, there is some form of AI, targeting systems, et cetera, et cetera. But really in my opinion, frightening one are the fully automated autonomic systems. That means drones which are no longer under direct control of a person, going out, doing whatever they need to do in an area, taking out targets, etc. Again, from an ethical standpoint, I find that to be completely frightening. And I sincerely would hope that we would find a way that this will not become reality. But then we have reality, and we look at the US and we look at China, and this is what they're developing. Actually, it has already been developed. We had the first case of this coming out of Turkey, fully autonomous drone, sent out, it was in the Sahel zone, and took out a whole bunch of terrorists. So again, this is where we have what I think we should be doing, and what I sincerely hope will not happen. And then I look at the big players, and they're already doing it. So what do we do with that?
So thank you, Puan Sharifah, for your question. Puan Sharifah is the energy expert in the field in today's room. I agree with you. In a perfect world, we do need to explore the potentials of other sectors, including the energy industry. I think your question was maybe more appropriate if you had grilled Sam Majid on that one. But the reality is, the difficulty with AI is that it's a cross-cutting technology. So it impacts all industries. But there's only so much budget that you can utilize on a national level or even on an ASEAN level, and it requires you to focus your concentration efforts on certain industries. So that explains why in the national AI roadmap, they identified 7 key sectors, if I'm not mistaken. Energy was not one of them, and that was back in 2021. The number 1 sector, which surprisingly, it caught me by surprise, was agriculture. So when I thought, I was like, why agriculture? But that conversation was in 2021. Things have changed, since November 2022 when ChatGPT came on. Now the focus is all about generative AI, building the public sector workforce, the government public sector workforce. And you hear more attention and more conversations, not so much from the energy side or the environmental side, how much power, and these are really pressing issues. How much power, do we have enough energy to sustain the new data centers? These are really hard-hitting questions, but it tend to be overshadowed by more of the more sunlight conversations about the benefits in health So I think in order to answer your question, that's more of like how would the National AI Office now want to approach it? Because now they're building various work groups and standards. So do they want to redefine the key sectors and what do we want to focus on when it comes to Malaysia? That would be a, and I do agree with you, energy is a big sector which we should be looking into.
Oh yeah, energy is going to be another crucial conversation. Another question from the floor, yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much for the views given, speakers. I just want comments from the speakers in terms of the critical part of data sets that, if not, in terms of risk management, where the critical point will be biasness in future. And these questions about basic human rights of fairness, empowerment, and ownership. Can you just comment that? Second is, this could be a critical view, to the bankers. We shout banking in Malaysia or everywhere, doing adaptations of AI. But simple thing, scamming is terrible, and especially not taken away savings of aging society. How that creativity can come about to solve this issue, rather than talking about AI adaptations and everything banking is addressed. Thank you. These two, please do.
I think we're going to go with Rohit first for the first part of that question.
Okay, this is really worked on, so I can comment on it.
We're talking about fairness, yes. And I'll address that in a more generic concept on values alignment, which encompasses this. The problems of fairness are not new, right? I mean, the effects are more now because we're using AI. But it's been about 20 years from data analytics and data-driven decision-making that we have exposure on fairness and discrimination, etc. So there are fairly robust frameworks, around the world on how to deal with this. That has also come down to the AI level. So, for example, in the US, you have the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau in the financial sector, and there's a requirement from a legal perspective, also from a regulatory perspective, in terms of ensuring fairness of systems. And the courts are really brutal in this, right? So in US, for example, where in the court system, if it is proven that not only that your system is discriminatory in some respect, you can't just say that I wasn't aware of it. The bar set by courts is about 20% difference between protected groups. If the divergence is more than that, then your system is classified as a judgment engine, okay, not as a decision engine. And that has very different legal consequences, right, in terms of your fine, in terms of your obligations of duty and or care, etc. So as far as fairness is concerned, I think we have made tremendous progress in terms of tackling that. And that can be extended to AI to a very large extent. Now, there's a larger problem, which has come about, which is values alignment, right? Fairness is one aspect of it. Because generative AI almost have certain human-like capabilities, what are the values that we as a society, that we as an organization need the AI to follow, right? Whether it is how it communicates with us, whether how it addresses us, etc. And this is a new area that we really need to work on. So.
I
just want to add one small anecdote specific to our field and in how. And in practical terms, so when we analyze campaigns, we use a lot of different systems, intelligence-based systems, OSINT systems, et cetera. And there's something very basic that in any kind of investigation we do is we try to find in a data set, so let's say X accounts, et cetera, how many of them are bots. Because that's a strong indication for us if there's a threat actor doing something. But how do you actually identify, if an account is a bot? And this is actually, this goes through training processes, et cetera, user behavior. Now, what we find is, and I speak a lot with different ministries, security services across ASEAN, they will buy systems, very expensive systems that they will implement, and then they find out after a certain amount of time that they actually don't work in a local context. Because of the LLMs that are being used were trained on data sets in the West or in the larger markets. So that's for just a practical example that we face in our work, that, for example, when we go to different countries and we try to analyze there, if there is not an existent LLM, we actually have to train them to be able to use them. But for many countries they spend ridiculous amounts of money and then are faced with actually a useless system. I have one question I'd actually like to ask you on that. I think Malaysia is a very, very interesting example, because Malaysia as a multi-ethnic state is you have multiple languages, you have multiple, let's say religion, ethics, you have multiple different types of user behavior. And how is it addressed here in Malaysia, actually?
Okay, so
In regards to
triple
AI.
questions, yeah. So thank you for your question. You're right. Biasness is something which is always going to be a problem, and it's in the nature of how AI is built, right? As Rohit and Florian said, it really depends on the data sets that it's built. This is a big problem in AI healthcare, right? For example, if you want to detect if you have lung cancer, it's being trained on data from certain individuals of a certain time frame, and these studies were back from 5 years ago. Eating habits may have changed. Maybe this lifestyles that we have in Malaysia is different from those of the European. Someone from a Caucasian background may be more susceptible to skin cancer compared to someone with darker skin. So biasness is always going to be a problem. There are tools to mitigate and manage it. So it's diversifying your data sets, making sure that there are certain maybe training or reinforcement training methods. So I don't know the exact technical terminology, but this is what my data scientists tell me on a daily day. And monitoring the output. So there needs to be a degree of human supervision when, because only humans can detect the biasness, right? We wouldn't be able to. In regards to how is Malaysia approaching it, I think we've heard it from the first panel, right? We're trying to encourage more startups to build up to give into the factors of building our data sets when it comes to language. So I think we have a few LLMs that are Malayan train based. I think one is called Malam. I personally never used it itself, but we're trying to create that inclusion on how can we further diversify. And I think also in Singapore as well, they're training their LLMs and how to understand Singlish. So when you try to interact with the bot, for example, if you're in a queue and you want to get an emergency response from the government, no one will get to you, but they'll be able to understand Singlish. So it's not like this multi-ethnicity. It's a problem even in Europe as well, right? There's so many ethnicities, and trying to battle that would be diversifying the data sets. But it's easier said than done, right? Because in order to get this, where's the data going to come from? How are you going to collect the data? Would you be infringing individual rights by, getting that data? I think a recent controversy you might be familiar with was the whole Ghibli trend, where you scan your face, your Raya pictures onto ChatGPT, and it generates your picture. So the negative people will say that, oh, you're giving away your face for free. But on the positive side is that at least they have more Asian faces to train ChatGPT, but translate it into a Ghibli side version. So yeah.
Coming back to the second part of the gentleman's question was about the scamming in the banking industry now. I know that it's usually done by locations and different nations which have this data and they buy it, and is usually a human being on the other side that does the scam. But what can banks now do nowadays to actually prevent people from getting scammed? Or I think that's similar to the question that you were heading in, right? Using AI.
Yeah. So I think that draws back to the point that I made, that the biggest risk to AI integration, it's a people risk. And the reality is that, well, as long as humans still exist, you will never be able to eradicate scams, right? There's always that human who wants to play that moral actor, that bad guy, and try to stain, because it's always about money, right? Financial loss and triggers. AI systems don't need money exactly. So it's a very human factor. So I think, for example, Bank Negara regulators, they're very aware of this problem, and that's why they're trying to utilize AI to combat it, because traditional methods are not working. That's why there's encouraging to, when it comes to fraud and anti-money laundering, they're encouraging to use and explore AI techniques to better detect. So the use of AI when it comes to combating scam is now a big hot topic, especially because, for one thing, you need to have better detection monitoring. You need to be able to, change how you penetration test certain systems to see if it's hackable. So it's when I spoke to a few cybersecurity experts and a few people from Interpol, they admitted that the criminals are more technologically advanced in their tactics compared to the ones who are working for an institute, right? They're 5 steps ahead. Like, we're only beginning to learn these low use cases, and they already have advanced mastery of technology. So, I mean, I don't have a secret formula on how do we stop scams, but, it's part of the business to not want that to happen, because it's, we're a customer-driven business. If there's too many scams, then we would lose customers.
I think that's a really fascinating topic, because it's something that we deal with, not directly, but it goes into the realm of deepfakes and social engineering. So when we talk about cybercrime and cyber attacks, and the initial steps often include social engineering, and which also goes in the direction of scams. And we're now in a world where to create a deepfake audio is so easy, and deepfake videos are so easy, and the technology is advancing faster than the detection technology. And it's a huge issue, not only in the banking area, in cybersecurity, in our field as well. I would argue, one of the top topics at the moment in this field.
Thank you, Florian. I have one question from the Slido here. It's anonymous. AI has been used to create biased public opinion, elections, and governance. How can we globally regulate the ethical use of AI? Can AI diplomacy prevent wars? This seems to be right up your alley.
Oh, wow. Wow, okay. So there's different elements in that. So first of all, again, when we're going into these kind of influence operations, manipulating public opinion, etc., I think I mentioned it before. Yes, AI use is prolific. It makes it easier, cheaper, and more accessible to many threat actors. When it comes to global regulation, this goes back to something I said initially. Looking at the geopolitical state of the world, we actually see that a lot of the international governing bodies are losing power and the ability to actually make binding decisions across the globe. So if the US decides something, China will say no, China will decide something, US says no, and then we have EU in between, ASEAN, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have much hope in that regard. One thing I will say, though, is I would wish that there is an increased pressure on the OpenAIs, Anthropics, et cetera, to actually ensure that their AIs are not misused. Now, actually all of them have their own internal intelligence apparatus that tries to track the use of their own AIs in these kind of hostile campaigns. But it's very intransparent. We don't know how much is actually used, how big these groups are, how much actually they're putting effort into it. I mean, we see what they tell us, and it looks very impressive. But then I look at what we're doing, and apparently it's not very impressive when you look at it on a larger scale.
Thank you so much, Florian. Okay, and the final question I'm going to take from Slido here. It's directed towards Rohit. Given the diverse stages of AI maturity across ASEAN, how can we ensure equitable access to AI infrastructure and capabilities, notably lower income countries? What's your view on that?
So I think the first
Is on the education front, right? If you look at even very low income countries, for example, India, for example, or even Ukraine, etc., their technical capabilities are actually really good from the people who are actually there. And today's world, whereby you have these online courses which are relatively cheap, etc., introduces an ability to really train your entire population in a relatively low cost basis. I think MIM itself has programs, etc., for various things. So the education aspect is the most important thing. Once you reach a certain critical threshold of AI understanding, where your population is actively involved in IT and AI, etc., it makes things a lot easier. There are, of course, various government initiatives, and there are a couple of studies that we were involved in South Africa and Europe on the AI maturity aspect of it. And it turned out to be a combination of the technical level and the access to education. Number two was the industry and how focused the industry was in innovating using AI. And the third aspect was the framework, either industry or regulatory at a higher level, which governs this playing field. So there are three aspects, I would say, in terms of ensuring that AI maturity, you progress on that scale.
Okay, thank you, Rohit. And I think that's going to be it for our panel now. But before we head off to the next part of the session, I would like to ask our panelists, in one sentence, what's the biggest mistake ASEAN should avoid as it regulates AI? Starting with, should we go ladies first or wait? Okay, let's go with Liana. In one sentence, what's the biggest mistake ASEAN should avoid as it regulates AI?
I think the one mistake, one sentence right now, one word, ignoring the existing capabilities and landscape inside the country. So we don't want blind transplants, like taking EU and then just throwing it on and hoping it will work. You have to understand what foundations are already there and build upon. So more of a layered approach, if we not a drastic, hard-handed approach.
So not simply copy, pasting, and adopting whatever is already there from a different region. All right. Florian?
Sorry. I would say over-regulating to the point that it actually stifles innovation.
All right, short and sweet. Thank you very much. And Rohit, in one sentence, what's the biggest mistake ASEAN should avoid as it regulates AI?
Too prescriptive and follow a more flexible approach at a higher level, and leave the implementation to lower levels in the industry who understand that sector well.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you to all three speakers for today. I think we can put our hands together for all the speakers. It feels like when it comes to ethics and AIs, there's still a lot of questions, but I think with the framework that we have right now, we're moving in the right direction. It is going to be a challenge because AI is advancing at breakneck speeds, and keeping up with it, I think that's the main hurdle. But as we discussed during the first panel and the panel now, education, as it always has been, is the way forward. Regardless of which country we are here in ASEAN, regardless of whether we're a high-income nation or low-income nation, it always falls back to education. So Congrats to MIM as well for launching this AI certification program. And we look forward to the next crucial conversations.